Hello! This painting takes about 40 minutes of labor time, 20 minutes of dry time, and 60 minutes, maybe 65 minutes total. We're starting out with a size 12 flat brush, a size 4 filbert brush, and a size 2 round brush, as well as a piece of 11 by 14 acrylic art paper. You can also choose to use a canvas. You're also going to need a palette paper, a water bin, paper towel, and then we're going to go over the paints here. So the first one I have is Beige by Americana. You're going to need about a quarter size on your palette for that. And then you are going to have the dark brown acrylic paint, which I used Burnt Umber by Americana, and have about a $1/2 size dollop of that on your palette. And then for the red acrylic paint, I used a Americana Tuscan Red, which you're going to see here in a minute. And it is also a quarter size portion of that. We also use an off-white acrylic paint, about a nickel size of that. I used Oyster Beige. Muted yellow acrylic paint, I used Antique Gold by Americana in nickel size. Orange acrylic paint, I used Americana Canyon Orange, and you're going to need that in nickel size. I used Jo Sonja's Carbon Black for the black acrylic paint in dime size, and then Folk Art Metallic Gold for the gold paint, again dime sized. I'm not going to add those to my palette just yet because I don't want them to dry out before I use them, since we have some drying time in between those things. You're also going to need a template that I created. It's available on my website for free, a pencil, and you should be all set and ready to go by then. And remember, this is your painting. You can change the colors, you can change the design, anything that you want, it's all up to you. So first we're going to take our size 12 flat brush and we're going to make kind of like the ring on the ground. So we're going to go about 3 finger widths height up, and we're going to start not quite in the corner, maybe about 1 or 2 finger widths in from the left side. And we're going to make a rainbow stroke. It's not quite a semicircle because you're only getting the top portion of the circle there. So start a little bit in from the left side, make a curved stroke that extends to the right side but doesn't quite get to the edge. And then you're going to fill it in with long strokes going from one side to the other in a curved fashion, kind of just like a rainbow. Once you get it all nice and even, you can move on to the next step. It's really important that I mention here that I'm painting on granite, which can be easily cleaned if I get any acrylic onto the surface. But if you aren't as lucky as I am, make sure that you put something underneath or you're using an easel. Now, I've had a little bit of practice with my own hobby, I guess you could say. After you rinse your brush, you're going to load your brush with the dark brown, the burnt umber, and I go right next to that curve that we just created, and I just go right above it so that there's no white space in between. Now you'll see here that this time I didn't load my brush properly, and so that's why you see that transparency coming through on the stroke. And that's okay. I just went back over it later after it dried, and it created a much darker opaque color. Just be, if you are somebody who is unsure about being able to create a stroke close to the other one without it starting to blend, because we don't want this area to blend, you can take your time, do little strokes all the way across, and then come back in and finish it with a larger stroke. So don't worry if you don't feel like you can follow the line 100% accurately. Once you get that first stroke completely completed, you are going to continue to build that curve up about 2 or 3 more stroke sizes up. So maybe like 1 or 2, actually like 2 or 3 finger widths, the stroke should be. And it should cover the bottom corners on both sides of the paper. Okay, so now that I have the base color of the grandstand in, I'm going to mix some of the beige and the dark umber together, about equal parts, to create a lighter shade so that we can create a gradient color on our stands. So I'm going to mix, load the brush, and then I'm just going to go right back in and create another curved stroke right above the dark brown strokes that we created a moment ago. And we are going to kind of blend it, so it is really important for that top portion of the dark brown to still be a little bit wet. Once you get that stroke in, you take a little bit more of the beige, you lighten up the color a little bit more, mix it really good, and then you can add another stroke on top of the curve and blend that one in as well. And you're going to keep doing this until you reach about 2/3 to 1/4 of the way up the canvas. So at the very top of the curve, you want to have about 3 to 4 finger width space between the top and the top of the curve. So the top of the page and the top of the curve. For my final stroke of the grandstand, I did just go directly into the beige to make a much lighter color at the top and then blended it in. So you have that option to do that as well. Okay, so now we are going to rinse your size 12 flat brush and we're going to load it with the red and we're going to fill in all of the white space that you see. This is going to be the background for our drapes. So just go ahead and start filling in, brushing along with the curve so that everything looks nice and even, and fill the entire white space in. If you feel like you need to, go ahead and do a couple little strokes over the very top of the grandstand so that you can have a more accurate line, and then just stroke over it to make it all even. Once you have the piece of paper completely covered with your background colors, you are going to allow it to dry so that we can move on to the next step. So what you're going to look for is no more shiny spots on your page. Give it at least 10 minutes and come back and we will do the next step. I just want to mention here that if you are painting on a flat surface and not on an easel, to continue with the layout of the steps of this painting, but if you have an easel, you might want to go and do the audience members first. If we're painting on a flat ground, you have a tendency to want to drop your wrist while we're painting the drapes, and you can smear the audience faces that way. However, the audiences do need more time to dry, and so and you're going to need that space for the tightrope walker. So if you have an easel, take advantage of it. Skip ahead, do the audience first, and then come back and do the drapes later. Okay, so we're going to start out with Oyster Base, and I'm going to be using the number 2 round brush, but you can also use the number 4 filbert brush. That's totally your preference depending on how thick you want the poles to be. So with the number 4 filbert, it's going to be much thicker poles. Now I start by putting the first pole over to the left, but I would actually suggest that you start in the center and do the center pole because it's right smack dab in the middle of the painting on the top. You're going to have 3 poles, and you just make a straight line is really all that you're doing. So once you get the center one done, you can kind of space out where you want the other 2 poles, and then you can kind of decide what kind of stylistic accent you want on this, whether it's you want the poles to be completely even all the way up and down, or you can do like I did where I slowly lift the brush head as I'm painting upwards to make a tapered type of effect. Once again, you can kind of have a little bit artistic liberties here by choosing which brush you're going to use to shade the drapes. I'm using the size 2 round brush, but you can use the size 4 filbert brush if you want thicker shading. We're going to create curves in the opposite way, going up towards each of the poles. So when you get closer to the pole, the higher up the curve should go. This is going to create a drape effect. Now, if you want to get really super fancy and play with your brush here, you can taper it by releasing pressure as you come closer to the pole, or increasing pressure to the brush to make a thicker, wider spread. In order to kind of make the thin and thick effect on the shading. So we're just going to do that all the way through with all of the red spaces and create that, like the drapery effect. Okay, so we are going to start on the audience now. If you have been using your filbert brush, you're going to want to rinse that off and dry it because we are going to be using that for the audience. And we are also going to be pulling out the orange and the yellow colors. You're going to place about a dime size dollop of each on the palette. I broke mine up into two portions, so two half-size dimes, if you will, on the palette because we are going to be using multiple different shades by mixing colors to create some diversity within our audience. The filbert brush has a rounded head on it, so when we dab with it, it's going to create kind of like this oval shape. And then the other thing that I want you to note is that when we sit in bleachers, they are in rows, so you need to kind of eyeball that out to make sure that when you dab these characters in there, that they are in some curved lines that are, you know, in rows so that it looks coherent. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mix the dark brown with the yellow, so the burnt umber. And then we are going to gradually add lightning colors to go along with the grandstand, how it gradually lightens up as it gets further and further up. So go ahead and just mix that straight with your paintbrush. Now, there's something that I kind of missed here in the video. You need to thin the well or the loading zone out with some water. You don't want it to be quite as transparent as watercolor, but it needs to be thin enough to where you don't get a very opaque oval shape for each individual audience member. You want it to be kind of transparent because otherwise it takes away from the tightrope walker. You're going to be adding just little dabs in the row, and you're going to kind of like, I went into a pattern of doing like random one person, two people sitting by each other, and three people sitting by each other of the same color, and I just went row by row and added some here or there, creating plenty of space in between for the other colors that I'm going to be adding later. Once you get about halfway through is when I added a little bit of a lightning color for the yellow. I think I chose the oyster beige, but it's all up to you on how you want to differentiate your colors, so feel free. Just make sure that they're getting a little bit lighter and not so much, yeah, see, I went into the oyster beige there, not so much the exact same color as the background. It's okay if you can't really see all of them, but you know, you want there to be some sort of variation in color to suggest that there's audience members out there. So you'll notice what I did at the top there was I added more yellow to create a more richer tone, just because I knew if I kept lightening it up it was going to blend too much. Now we're going to go into the second yellow dollop, and I'm going to add oyster beige to it to make a lighter color. And then I'm just going to add more people into the rows. Make sure that you water down the brush in the loading zone so that it's a little bit transparent, and you're just gonna add more. Okay, I'm moving on to my next color for the audience members. I'm taking a little bit of the oyster beige and adding it to some of the orange. This is going to create more of a natural white flesh tone. And then I'm going to water it down and make it a little bit more transparent. I was just checking to see what the contrast was between the yellow and the orange. I was just kind of seeing how different it was going to be. So water it down and create some more random people in the grandstand. And then we will move on to the other orange. All right, so it's time to do the last orange here. I'm going to do the burnt umber along with the orange color, and I'm going to mix it up. And we will have, I think I made one other color after this. I'm not sure, but it's completely up to you. It's your painting. There's artistic liberties you can take with this. Really play with the colors. Just make sure that it's transparent so it doesn't take away from the tightrope walker, and you can diversify the colors as much as your little heart desires. So to begin with the spotlights, we are going to use the size 12 flat brush. We're going to rinse it and dry it off. And you want to get it clean enough so that it doesn't have a lot of color in the residue. You're going to dip it into some cleaner water, so you may have to change your water. And then you are going to put it into the oyster beige. Pick up just a little bit of it, put a little place separate on your palette, and then you're going to mix it with some water to really thin it out. You're going to load the chisel of the flat brush, and then you're going to take the chisel edge up to not quite the corner of the top of the page on one side, and you're going to make a diagonal line going towards kind of like the mid-center, further out, because your tightrope rocker isn't going to be directly in the center. And then you're just going to make several other lines coming from that same spot to convey the widening of the light. After you do that, rinse your brush, get all the white out, and then dip it in the water, and then run your thick side of the brush up and down those strokes in order to get like this very transparent overlay, to make it appear as though light is shining from a spotlight outside of the picture frame. You're going to do this on the opposite side as well. And you're going to kind of try and eyeball guess where the tightrope walker would be so that the light is at least hitting the individual's head and arms as well as the feet. So you kind of want to try and get almost the whole body inside. So you got to use your imagination just a little bit here. But yeah, create those thin strokes and then dip your brush in the water again. And then use the thick part of the brush to kind of glaze over to make it look like it's a light. Now you're going to take the template that you've printed and cut out from my website, and you're going to trace around it. Now, this is a beginner's project, so that's why we're using a template, and I am not very great at instructing how to draw and paint full human figures yet. So we'll get there eventually, but this is something that I hand drew and then copied and then made it into a printable PDF. So you're just going to place the individual off center and trace the outline lightly so that you have a guide on where you are filling in the black portion of your piece. Now that we have the spotlights dried, we are going to fill in the tracing with carbon black. I'm going to use my number 2 round brush, and I'm just going to kind of trace around the outline of what I previously put in pencil, and then I'm going to fill in the inside. Once you got that complete, rinse off your brush, and we're going to bring out the gold. You're going to need half of a dime size little blop on your palette. You're going to run your size 2 round brush in it, and you're just going to highlight areas on the body. So tip of the hair, anywhere where the spotlight might be touching that you think could be highlighting. The side of the cheekbone, maybe her backside and her thigh, and then the backside of her calf, the one that's bent there, maybe her fingertips if they're touching the light, and then the part of the tightrope that is also touching the light. You're going to let it dry, and then you will have your masterpiece complete. If you enjoyed this and you want to stay up to date on all of the paintings that I am sharing, please feel free to subscribe to my YouTube channel or join my email newsletter. I hope to see you guys at the next project.